But right now, if I'm a an ecologically interested dude, and I want to buy a new car, and I'm talking about the total impact, start to finish, research. I don't care where you want to start this, and graveyard at the end. Today, where are we at? Which car is the best car to make sure that my children can breathe clean air and have water and fish and whatever it is in the future?
An EV. I mean, the worst case scenario today on grid electricity is that your average EV is about twice as clean as your average gas car, give or take a little bit of individual mix. That's the worst case scenario. The scenario gets better when you start talking about the grid getting cleaner over time, and solar and wind and those sorts of things. So that's the short number answer.
So I read about this company in Palo Alto, Better Place, and I rarely see them mentioned in articles about electric cars. I'm wondering what you think of their model of leasing the battery and then having stations where you can swap out the battery for a quick sort of charge.
I think it's a very ambitious model, but what we have seen, particularly among many of the early folks, is they don't think of their battery packs like propane tanks. And they have some concern about taking in their new battery and swapping it and getting one that's a couple years old or may not be the same. And many of you in this room are very specific about how you charge and use your cars and different things to try to ensure your battery life. So there's that. But it also goes back to the infrastructure question of how much do we really need and the fast charging and that kind of thing. Even Better Place will agree that most of it's a psychological answer. Range anxiety is a psychological problem, and all of these infrastructure answers in the public are some form of psychology to try to address range anxiety. And if we all agree it falls away fairly quickly from using it, how much do you really need the swapping? So it's one way to solve that problem. It's one way to enable long road trips. I don't know that it's going to become the way, especially in this country. It's easier in places like Israel for a variety of reasons. That said, there's interesting things about battery leasing, to the economics question of how do we change the economics of this. Whether that's best done by a separate entity remains to be seen. Nissan for a while was talking about it as well. We're going to lease our batteries, sell the rest of the car, that kind of thing. Again, there's some consumer discomfort, especially about EVs, and given the history of anything that involves leasing, or not owning all of the car, or at least being able to buy all of the car at the end of a lease. So there's some issues there too, again, US specific, California specific. But at the same time, there are also things like warranty issues to be solved. Not that they can't be, just things to work through. If you have a problem with your car, you take it to your dealer and your poor service writer ends up fighting it out with whoever has the battery lease versus whoever actually made the car of which problem caused what and who's going to pay for it. And you're going, I just want my car back. So there's some really pragmatic issues to be solved in terms of the customer experience, which is always what I'm going to flog in terms of all of these new ideas. What does it mean to the customer? So it's got potential in certain ways. There's some interesting things about it.
Hi, thanks for being here. My question has to do with legislation. What do you think that would help this process in legislation, and what can we do?
I think the best thing that can help us in terms of policy right now is to get a whole lot more thoughtful about it. We have recently passed a few, an HOV lane bill in California that wasn't terribly well done. We're on the cusp of passing some federal legislation requiring added noise to all hybrids and plug-in hybrids and EVs that I don't think is particularly well done. Yeah, so there's a lot of things like that. There's sort of reactionary policy right now. And so on one hand, there's an attitude of, we're really thrilled we finally have a president who's supportive of this, and all sorts of dollars going to it. But any dollar for an EV is not necessarily a good dollar if it's spent badly. Any policy that supports an EV is not a good one if it has bad side effects. And I'm seeing a lot of that's kind of concerning, because it will come back to bite us. Just like we spend too much on infrastructure that doesn't get used, or whatever it is, those poor choices will come back to bite us. So I think we have to be careful on that. At the same time, in terms of just driving this forward, I think we need to pay more attention to non-financial incentives. We've spent a lot of time worrying about the money, and the money matters, but particularly among the early adopters who tend generally to be less price sensitive than the mainstream, things like HOV, things like free parking in LAX or airports, even at meters, I'm shocked because it's not that huge a financial benefit and yet drivers love it and scream for it when it's gone. So things like that that can be done on a state, regional, municipal level where communities can get involved, things they can control without having to go to DOT or whoever, really matter.
I got a question regarding the end of life on batteries, and I just walked up, so I don't know if you've addressed this, but my concern and what's holding me back is what do you do with, all the batteries that are going to be end of life and the recycling or disposal, and also as a follow-on to that, where is fuel cell in its development cycle at this point?
I'm not the fuel cell expert. I will say there are some out there. Mercedes just announced they're going to bring some more. Of this group, I'd probably suggest going and talking to Toyota because they have one here, which means I assume they have someone knowledgeable on them here. On end-of-life batteries, we sort of figured out battery recycling when we started putting one in every car on the road today. So there's absolutely no expectation or allowance even for batteries to go into landfills. We have recycled the lead batteries that were in cars, the nickel, and there are a couple of companies that do the lithium. They're still refining on that, and more companies need to come and that sort of thing. However, there's also a lot of usable life in these batteries when they're no longer good for a car. When they don't have enough power to be an EV anymore, there's still 70 or 80% of their energy left. So there's much more potential for taking those same batteries and using them for grid storage or solar or something like that, one or two more uses before they're ultimately recycled. And to the economic arguments, we're looking at how do we maybe amortize costs over all those uses and save money up front and that kind of thing. But we pollute far more with all the little double A's we toss in the trash than any automotive batteries.
Quick question on the fear that I've been reading about in the press that, once EVs go mainstream, we're going to have blackouts at 6 o'clock in the evening. Can you speak to that?
Well, yes. There is both a legitimate core question in there, as well as a bunch of other stuff surrounding it. First, we want to try to get people not to plug in at 6 o'clock in the evening. We already have a second peak in the day from all the plasma TVs that get turned on then. So really the goal here is to get everyone to use the timers that many of the chargers will have and all of the cars will have to charge their vehicles later at night, 10 p.m. or later, that kind of thing. It's always going to be full in the morning when you leave anyway, so it doesn't have to start at 6. So that's part of it. And just encouraging good consumer behavior. And the utilities in California are particularly useful at that because they generally all have time of use pricing and cheaper nighttime pricing for EVs and that kind of thing. So they're way ahead of much of the rest of the country in that regard. They're already supportive of this. The other aspect is some perspective. A lot of the utilities talk as if we're going to have 1 million of these things tomorrow. In addition to the peaks, we hear a lot about transformers blowing and that kind of thing. In certain neighborhoods, that's absolutely an issue. 2 or 3 electric cars on a block will have an issue with that individual transformer. But we're not going to see that many cars that soon in most cases. So part of it will be a little bit of answering as it happens, but part of it is trying to work with the utilities and the policymakers to get much better at the planning, much better at the data collection of where the demand really is, where the cars are likely to pool. They're doing a little bit of it already based on the last generation of EVs, but also where hybrids have gone. The expectation is that'll be the first places where EVs will go and some of those sorts of things. So it's very much a planning issue and not trying to pull people off the ceiling of too much of this sort of shrill rhetoric, but also recognizing that's going to have to be answered and that it's fair to do so.
Hey Chelsea, just want to know whose responsibility do you think it is to actually build the public charging infrastructure? Is it utilities? Is it pay for play like we see a company doing right now? Or do you think it is the government that needs to do this?
I'm not sure it's a singular responsibility, but all of those things are being pursued, less the utilities. Right now it's mostly government funded, and there is certainly the pay-to-play model, although that gets murky too because we have pay-to-play companies taking government funding to put in monetized charging. There are some layers to that. The last generation was sort of half automaker and half publicly funded. GM paid for a lot of the chargers that are out there today. So I think we'll see a variety of models going forward. Whether we're ready for monetization remains to be seen. We're the only alternative fuel that has an incumbent history of free public fuel. And how the public will feel about paying for that, we don't know. And what's that inflection point? I mean, there comes a point, and it's not very high, where charging for public electricity becomes as expensive as putting gas in a Civic. And I'm not sure that's the story we want either. So, there's a lot of discussion about, well, monetized charging needs to just undercut the price of gas, and that's not at all what you're competing with. You're competing with other available sources of electricity. And given that most people are not dependent on public charging, they'll just wait till they get home. So there's a balance of when's the right time. We absolutely believe that if we get all the cars we want, there will come a time where it may not be sustainable to give it away. And most current site owners give it away because they like the goodwill, the brownie points. We haven't monetized charging not because we don't know how, but because our site owner said we don't want to do it. Ralph's would rather have you come in and spend money there, and they get some warm fuzzies and some lead points. So when that tips to a site that it sees so many EVs they can't give it away anymore, we don't know. I think it's going to be at least 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I was wondering, as far as battery recycling, when that lithium gets recycled, does it lose any of its value to go into a new battery? In other words, is there a point at which we can stop having to extract lithium from the sand?
We can absolutely pull the core materials out of lithium batteries and use them to make new batteries, no question. So yes, recycling will support a lot of new battery packs. At the same time, we've gone through 3 different battery chemistries in the dozen years or so, 15 years we've been doing this. We had lead, we had nickel, we have lithium. Personally, I don't think we're going to be on lithium forever either. So I think long before that ever became an issue, if it were to become an issue, there are all sorts of very smart people, many of them in this region, that are working on what comes next in terms of batteries.
Okay, I'm going to take the last question. It's a little simplistic, but why does all this matter?
That's the simple question?
Yeah, it's simple. I mean, what are your motivators? Why are you motivated at the end of the day to promote this?
Well, I think everyone comes at it with their own motivation. I happen to like it because it's one technological solution that solves a lot of problems. I came to this geek first. I didn't come at it enviro first, but it has all of those sorts of benefits: environmental, security, economics, empowerment, sort of you name it, it's there. And so I sort of joke that, I don't care what brought you to the table, I care about the table. And I think that's why we're all here. And because if we don't show that it's real and make people believe and give them some hope, we're not going to have a next movie to make, and I think we have to do that. So you're all producers.
Please join me in thanking Chelsea Sexton. Thank you, Chelsea.